I've been anxiously awaiting the arrival of Prim's foal for a couple of sleepless nights now. As luck would have it, as soon as I fitted her with her alert collar, she started showing some pretty serious signs that she was going to foal in the next couple of hours. Welcoming a new life into this world is always a magical process. Unfortunately for Prim, hers is the birth story that I was really not planning on telling. Prim entered stage 1 labor at 6:30 p.m. and from the beginning I knew it was going to be a little bit of a difficult process for her. Since I did get her in this position, I am obligated to make sure I'm awake for the birth. Most of the time horses can give birth unassisted, but for those who have trouble, it is imperative that someone is around to help them through. When I made Prim's birthing stall, I decided to have it next to her herd mates just for a little bit of moral support. I'm really glad I did because it does seem to be helping her.
Hi there. See you baby soon.
Prim was bred 330 days ago, so that is a little bit earlier than average. The last few nights have been false alarms. She does seem a little bit uncomfortable, but nothing quite like she was showing me this evening. I had one pretty big scare with her around day 300 that looked very similar to what she was doing earlier. There's still a chance that she will not foal tonight and she was just doing some more fetal repositioning. I tried really hard to keep Prim in perfect condition for this pregnancy so that she would have the energy and muscle to squeeze the little baby out. With her being a fit young mare, I was actually a little bit worried she was going to foal without me even realizing it. It's pretty common for horses to know when humans are watching, and as soon as you step away, they just pop the baby out. As the night went on though, I thought there was no way I was going to miss this baby. Prim continued to be uncomfortable and I monitored her from inside my house so I did not disturb her. The security camera that I set up worked perfectly for this. While I was inside spying on her, she continued to pace around and prepare for the birthing process. And after a few hours, it became quite violent. Stage 1 labor for horses usually lasts between 1 and 4 hours. Right now, Prim is on hour 3. She's getting significantly more uncomfortable. A lot of people don't get to see this part because they're typically popping out to the barn in real life. Usually, mares do not want to be disturbed while they're foaling, so if I were to walk out here and check on Prim, she would probably stop this behavior. Prim is typically a very expressive horse, so this kind of behavior is relatively normal when she's upset. As far as the average run-of-the-mill broodmare, though, it is a little bit more than most people should expect to see. With how long this has been going on and the increase in intensity, I am at this point thinking that Prim is going to foal pretty darn soon. I don't want to stop the process by coming out and checking on her in real life, but eventually I am going to have to go out so I can be closer for when she does foal. After observing Prim for as long as I possibly could without checking her, I eventually made my way out to her pen. There are a few pretty big emergencies that you want to be around for in the event that they happen. One of the big ones that people that foal out mares always talk about is a red bag. That is when the placenta prematurely separates and it tries to come out before the baby. In the womb, the foal is receiving all of the things that it needs via the placenta, so when it detaches, their oxygen supply cuts off. Without someone in attendance, these red bag foals will die. Even during times when a person is around, the clock is ticking as soon as that placenta separates because the baby needs to come out as soon as possible so they can have air. With the amount of trouble that Prim is having getting going, I was really thinking that that is something I might be witness to. I checked on her very briefly to make sure I didn't see any signs of a red bag delivery, and then I went inside the cat house, turned off my headlamp, and continued to watch her from the security camera. I think I may have slowed down her progress a tiny little bit, but it was important that I got out there to check in real life. The camera is pretty darn good. I can see a lot of things, especially when she positions herself just right, but it's always good to get out and see in real life what's going on. Tiny and I hunkered down in the cat house and continued to observe Prim. She showed a few more signs that her body was getting ready to foal. She had some diarrhea. She urinated a few times. I think that made her feel a bit more comfortable with some more room for the baby to wiggle around, so she went to get a snack. Although there are averages for stage 1, it can go on a little bit longer. Maiden mares typically do not play by the rule book, so I'm not too terribly worried at this point yet. I'm really lucky that I have enough experience that I feel confident, even if things go wrong, that I can help Prim. I've witnessed and assisted the vet with several dystocias, some that turned out okay, some that turned out not so great. Prim has had a lot of regular veterinary care up until this point, and on our last visit we did some planning with the vet just in case of emergencies. With us being pretty far from a bigger veterinary practice, the only surgical center is about an hour and 40 minutes away. In the event that Prim needs to be seen by a vet, there's a pretty low chance that I'm going to call the local one. I'll probably just load her up and take her to a place that can give her the proper care. My truck is already hooked up to the trailer. I've planned for it, but I'm really hoping that I don't have to take any midnight rides with Prim. Even if you take your mare to foal out at a different facility with more experience, the chances that they're going to have all of the things that you need for a real serious emergency are pretty slim. While a red bag is an emergency for the foal, typically the mare ends up being okay. But for some dystocias, the only option is surgery. I definitely don't want that to happen, and at 10:50 p.m. Prim's water finally broke. This signals the end of stage 1 labor and the beginning of stage 2, which is the actual birth of the foal. I noticed as soon as her water broke, she did feel a little bit more comfortable. I had a little bit of trouble setting up her breeder alert system. I didn't get the right size batteries at first, and then the phone number that was hooked up to it was not correct. I didn't have a chance to test it out on her in real life. In order for it to work, she needs to be laying down flat on her side for 13 seconds, something she has not done yet, so if I wasn't out here looking at her with my real eyeballs, I would have no idea that she is about to foal. Same thing for the foal alert, the one that is sewn in. Since the baby is not coming out yet, it would have not alerted yet either. These monitoring systems are definitely a backup just in case they foal when you're not watching. But it is really important to see the stages of labor so you can take note of the time and track when things are not progressing as they should. Typically, when a mare's water breaks, they should have the foal relatively quickly. 15 to 20 minutes is the average, and after 5 minutes, Prim is showing no sign that the baby is coming out. Maiden mares can struggle a little bit, so I'm not too terribly worried yet. I noticed her really wiggling back and forth, trying to get that baby in position. This is almost typical of what a red bag might look like because the baby hasn't presented yet. In my mind, I'm getting ready for that scenario to happen because if I see that, I need to jump in and as quickly as I can get the baby out. I was really starting to get worried, and then 10 minutes after her water broke, she really started pushing hard. Typically, 10 minutes after the water breaks, you should start to see feet. I'm growing increasingly worried at this point because Prim is pushing as hard as she can and there is still nothing coming out. I don't want to stop her progress, but eventually I'm going to have to go out there and see what exactly is going on. If there isn't any progress soon, then this becomes a dystocia or difficult birth very quickly. A dystocia is a difficult birth. The reason doesn't really matter at this point. If I'm not seeing any baby, it is extremely troubling. Time does seem to stand still in these situations, so I always make note of the time just so I can tell how much has passed. We were very closely approaching the 20-minute mark, which is when the baby should have been out. "20 minutes after her water broke, she started pushing in a more normal fashion. With the baby finally in position, I began to see little tiny feet. She definitely is not out of the woods yet, but I knew that she did not have a red bag, so that is just one thing to cross off my list. Although she did have some difficulty up to this point, there's no reason for me to step in, so I'm just watching from the outside of her stall at this point. There are no lights in this stall. I contemplated putting them up or not. The security camera works much better without lights, especially at night, which is when most foals arrive. It is really important though that I'm able to visualize what's going on, so I do have a headlamp, and at points throughout this process I did have to use my phone as well. In the wild, horse babies need to be born and get up and run away from predators relatively quickly, so the birthing process typically is pretty swift. Again, with maiden mares, it can take a little bit longer. Stage 1 of her labor was pretty exhausting with all of the running around she was doing. The beginning of stage 2 was pretty traumatic for her as well. Although I was really relieved to see the foal's front feet, after a while she was still not making any progress. Foals present like they're diving out of the mare, and I can see from its feet that it is in the correct position, but Prim cannot seem to get the head out. This is the reason that you need to have someone present when your mare is foaling. Although I do not want to interrupt the birth, I need to check to make sure the foal is coming out in the right position. Everything looks to be in order, so I'm just gonna let Prim try and push for a little bit longer. With a significant amount of time passing and no real progress, I decided to reach inside Prim and make sure that everything was lined up as it should be. The baby's front legs were twisted up like a pretzel, and as soon as I moved them, it seemed like something gave way. Foals are not like calves. You cannot pull them out. Pulling a foal out when you are not sure what exactly is stuck typically can be very dangerous for the mare. Prim was trying really hard to get the baby out, but every time she got the head out, it would suck back in. After a few attempts, I finally went in there and readjusted the baby again. Typically, when a mare delivers the head, it'll just continue coming out. 35 minutes after she started foaling, I noticed that the baby's tongue was not a normal color. Thankfully, after the last adjustment, the baby sucked back into Prim, and I think that it fixed whatever was not quite right. Unfortunately, at this point, I thought I was delivering a dead baby.
Almost there, Mama. Big push, Mama. There you go, girl. You're almost done, Mama.
Whatever was going on inside caused the baby to lose oxygen. I was really surprised to see this foal's nose hole flare when it was coming out, and immediately switched my mindset from a dead baby to delivering a live one.
There you go, girl. There you go, Mama. Good girl. Oh, good girl. Oh, good Mama. Good Mama. Oh, good Primmy. It's all right, girlie. It's okay. It's all right, Prim. There you go.
Even after it had got some fresh air, the foal's tongue was still not a normal color. I think Prim, the foal, and I were all in a state of shock at this point. As soon as Prim stood up, her entire placenta came out and plopped down on the baby. She definitely seemed a little bit disoriented, and I had to scooch the foal away so she didn't accidentally step on him. Prim was definitely put through the ringer with that one. While it did look like the baby was presenting normal, the time it took was definitely much longer than should have been expected. With so much time passing between when the baby came out first and kept getting sucked back in, it was not a surprise that he was deprived of oxygen. However he was twisted up in there was definitely pinching his cord. It's always ideal to have the mama wake the baby horse up so they can bond, but at this point in time, this little guy needed a lot of rubbing. He wasn't breathing super great, but after really aggressively toweling him down, he was doing a lot better. I've delivered quite a few babies, and at this point, I'm in autopilot. One of the very easiest ways for a young foal to get very sick is to suck things up through the umbilical cord. I did have time to call my husband right when the baby came out, so he brought me some fresh warm towels from the house. I tried to explain to him the difficulty Prim was having with the baby, but not being a horse person, he didn't really understand, especially since the baby was out and everybody seemed okay. Prim was fairly obviously having some difficulty processing what had just gone on. She seemed a little bit scared of the baby and ran right over to stand next to Ziggy and Scarlet. The baby's mucous membranes were nice and pink, so now I'm just focused on making sure that Prim is okay. I would love it if she snapped out of whatever state she's in and came over and took care of her baby. For a little guy that was blue a few minutes ago, it was pretty exciting to see him trying to get up so early. There were a few signs early on, though, that he just was not going to adapt to life outside of the womb. It wasn't too cold yet, but later on we're supposed to get some snow and the temperature is going to drop below freezing. At this point, the baby is dry. I would love to put his little blanket on him, but it's important that Prim gets over here and bonds with him. Throughout the birthing process, we've met none of the milestones so far. Prim went a little bit long in stage 1 labor. Her stage 2 was not textbook. She's still acting extremely painful. She did pass her whole placenta, so I can give her some anti-inflammatories. A retained placenta is a huge deal with horses. They can get septic very quickly, like within a few hours. When Prim was really struggling, I was debating on whether or not I should call the vet. They have an emergency service, so I may have been able to get someone out here. As far as emergency measures go for a horse that was having trouble like Prim, they probably would have done the exact same thing that I did. Check the position, rearrange as needed, and then honestly hope for the best. I'm really hoping after Prim gets some IV anti-inflammatories that she will take more interest in the foal she just had. This is honestly not that uncommon for a maiden mare. At this point, I'm just really happy she's not being overly aggressive towards it, but she definitely doesn't care too much about him. When I dipped his umbilical stump in the chlorhexidine, I did see that this little guy is in fact a boy. Typically, people will try and treat the stump within 30 minutes of the horse being born. I tried to keep Prim's stall as clean as possible, but with birthing fluid and diarrhea around, it is going to be pretty easy for this little guy to pick something up if he squirms around too much. The next milestone that we have to hit is having this little foal stand up within 1 hour of him coming out. With him being blue for so long, it's pretty surprising that he is so alert at this point. With some anti-inflammatories on board, I need to try harder to get Prim to interact with her foal, so he tries to make an effort to stand. As far as newborn foals go, this little guy stood up much more quickly than normal. Pretty much as soon as Prim bit him on his tiny little booty, he shot straight up in the air. I think the anti-inflammatories definitely have her feeling a bit better. And it seemed like the other horses were pretty excited to meet him.
She had a traumatic birth. He's trying.
Once a foal stands, the next really important thing that they do is wander over and get some of that good colostrum. Foals are born without any immunity. It doesn't get passed in the womb, so he needs to drink to be able to get the antibodies he needs to survive. Prim has been licking him down pretty good, and she's been trying to get him to move by biting him on his little butt. But this little guy doesn't seem to have his bearings yet.
Good mama.
Since he was deprived of oxygen for quite a while, there are a few things I am worried about. And after trying to get him to move for quite a while, I can tell that Prim is starting to get frustrated too.
Hey, Mare.
This little guy did not want to move when she nipped him on the butt, so she started really pulling on his ears. You can see that he's trying to nurse, but he doesn't really exactly know where to go. Of course, typically foals that go from womb to real life have some trouble adjusting, but this little guy is showing more signs that he is going to have a little bit of a hard time finding the milk. Although he stood up way faster than he needed to, after he got up, he just could not move his legs to get around. Even with the help of Prim nipping him on the butt, he just did not have the strength to move. Unfortunately, I do have some experience with dummy foals. The ones that I have seen in the past have been quite a bit more floppy than this guy. Typically, they just kind of flop around on the ground like a blob. They don't try and get up. They don't try and nurse. This guy has already vocalized, but it did not sound normal. At this point, I'm trying to decide if he just needs a little bit more time to recover or if there's actually something more sinister going on. Since it is extremely important for him to get that colostrum, I decided after Prim could not roust him or get him to move towards her udder that I was going to have to step in and help. It was also starting to get a little chilly, and these newborn foals cannot regulate their temperature, so it's important that I allow him to stay warm. He does have a pretty good suck reflex, which is awesome, so I think he just needs a little bit of help getting to where the milk is actually at. For a maiden mare, Prim is doing a really good job trying to get him awake and moved around to where he can drink. This little guy still seems to be having some trouble moving them really long legs though. This is probably the hardest thing about knowing a little bit too much about when things go wrong. I know how quickly these young foals can go downhill if they don't meet all of their benchmarks. This little dude is standing up pretty decently well before he needs to, but he just cannot seem to move around. After the trauma he suffered through his birth, it is not a surprise. As time went on, it was becoming more and more apparent that Prim was really going to need some help with this little one. I noticed that when he did kind of scooch around, as soon as he got close to her udder, she would wheel around and he just couldn't quite figure it out. It's pretty common to have to tie a maiden mare up in order for her to not squirm when the baby tries to find the udder. And it's looking like I'm going to have to do the same thing with Prim. In the grand scheme of things, it hasn't been too long after he was born yet to start really worrying about him getting his colostrum, but I really want to get it in him sooner rather than later. Prim has been a pretty good girl throughout all this, and I needed her to stand still for me to help this little guy nurse. She doesn't seem too excited to have the other horses near her baby, so I tried to show this guy the way to the milk on the opposite side. Most of the time, foals just have the sense to know exactly what they're supposed to do to find the milk. The more I tried to help this little one, the worse he actually got. It felt like he really didn't know where his legs were and couldn't move around normally. Technically, he still was before the time he needed to be standing up and walking around, so I didn't worry about it too much. I milked a little bit of Prim's colostrum out and tried to feed it to him, hoping that it might spring him back to life after his traumatizing birth. He was able to suckle it off my finger, so that was a really good sign. Even though I am helping him find the udder, I'm trying to be as hands-off as possible. Helping them initially is totally fine, but you really do want them to be able to do this on their own. Although I have seen a few dummy foals in the past, I haven't been around one that is this aware but just cannot seem to figure things out. Enough time has passed that he should be progressing and figuring out this whole milk thing. I let him stand with Prim for a while, and there were a few signs that he just was not acting as he should. Foals can have some trouble seeing at birth, but this guy was doing a few things that were extra weird. I noticed at points he was stargazing, which meant just kind of looking at the ceiling and holding his head in a really weird way. He also still seemed to not be able to actually walk with his legs. They were just kind of stiff, and he would scooch around even when Prim was pushing him. While he seemed to know that Prim was around, he just did not seem drawn to her at all. Prim was really trying hard. She was doing all of the things that should have elicited a response, but he just was not coming around. He did not really react when Prim or I touched him, and he still just kind of wandered aimlessly around. This guy was proving to be a little bit of a puzzle because he was doing some things really much sooner than he should have been. With all of the nipping on his hind end, he did pass a few really good piles of his first poop, something that can be trouble for little foals. He lay down to take his first nap after just a few little drops of milk, and I decided I needed to try harder to get him to nurse. I was hoping maybe he was just a little bit extra exhausted from the birth, and once he got his milk, he would spark up. You can see here how he's kind of staring at the ceiling, just not understanding what is going on. He did seem to react to my headlamp and whenever Ziggy vocalized to him, but he still did not really seem to want to interact with Prim. Compared to the very first time I tried to get him to nurse, he was doing much worse. The more I tried to help him, the more discombobulated he seemed to be. If I had my hands on him at all, he just didn't appear to know how to stand up. This whole time he did have a really good sucking reflex, so if I was able to get him exactly right, he would be able to get a few little drinks of milk. But he quickly would lose focus and kind of wander aimlessly around. He was able to walk a tiny bit better after a few sips of milk, but still just did not seem to have his bearings about him. The poor little dude ended up getting caught up in Prim's feed pan while I was in the cat house getting a few supplies. I do have some powdered colostrum, but it looks like if I get him just exactly right, he will be able to get some milk. At this point, I am still pretty worried about this little guy. He's still doing a lot of stargazing and wandering around, just kind of aloof to everything that's happening. Foals need to get a significant amount of the colostrum in order to have the antibodies that they need. Otherwise, they are extremely susceptible to infection. I've been looking at Prim's milk with a refractometer to see how good the colostrum is, and it should be plenty to get this guy going. As long as he figures out how to drink it, we should be good. Getting a few little tastes of this milk did seem to perk him up, and after a while I decided to have a more hands-off approach. Anytime he kind of lost his bearings, I'd give him a little nip in the butt like Prim would have been doing if she wasn't tied up. After a lot of troubleshooting, at 12:30 a.m. this guy got a pretty good drink of milk. It's a good thing I finally got this little guy to latch because Tiny was on my heels the entire night supervising. Since this foal seemed to be able to latch pretty well, I wanted to give Prim the opportunity to get him nursing on his own without being tied up. She's tried to be a really good mama so far, so I didn't want her to be tied up for too long. With this little guy now seemingly able to use his legs a little bit better, I'm hoping that he'll figure out how to wand over and get a drink of his own. But as time went on, it seemed like he just was not interested. Even though he got a pretty good drink of milk, he is going to need to have a lot more to get the immunity he needs. He seems to have a pretty good handle on his legs now, but he's still really having trouble making his way to the milk. I decided to let him try a little bit longer with just Prim before I stepped in. Even though Prim has not been a mother before, she instinctively knew that she had to push this little guy back to his udder to get him to drink. He did have a really good reflex still, but he was sucking on literally everything other than what he was supposed to. Since he had nursed before, I was hoping that he would eventually figure it out. I left them alone for quite a while, but this little guy just really would not come around. The colostrum is one of the most important things for these foals to get. After watching them struggle for a while, I finally stepped in and showed this guy the way. It would have been really nice to administer some oxygen to this guy when he came out. I think it definitely would have helped him. And while he really doesn't look too terrible, he's still doing some things that are quite concerning. With the storm on the horizon, I decided to bed down their stall a little bit more in between helping this little guy find the milk. Every 15 to 20 minutes or so, I would get up and help this guy nurse. In between, he would either nap or kind of wander around the stall aimlessly. As the night went on, the time he spent just staring off into the space became more worrisome. Unless I put him right up to the nipple and showed him that there was milk inside, he just could not find it on his own. And at this point, I could tell Prim was getting a little bit worried about him too. In addition to stargazing, he would just stand in one spot and try and nurse when there was nothing around. He also did not seem to be aware of things right in front of him, so I don't think that he could actually see. When foals have a traumatic birth, there can be a few things that don't get triggered quite right in their little brains. There is a technique called the Madigan squeeze, which kind of mimics their entry into the world. And after seeing this guy struggle for quite some time, I decided it wouldn't hurt to give it a try. Foals have special neurochemicals that are present that creates a sedate state while they're in the womb. The squeezing that happens as these foals pass through the birth canal triggers a shift in these chemicals. Sometimes, if the horses have a traumatic birth or they're not squeezed just right coming out, it can affect these neurochemicals. This technique is pretty interesting. It was accidentally discovered by Dr. Madigan when they were using this technique to restrain foals. I have done this on some really floppy dummy foals and it has worked quite well. Before Prim foaled, I did re-familiarize myself with this technique just because I'm going to be handling this foal alone. While it is still used to help dummy foals, it can also be used on young foals as a form of restraint because it does put them in a very sleepy state. In the event that I would have to do any vet work on this guy, using this technique would be instrumental because I don't have a lot of extra hands around. Over the course of 3 hours, I squeezed this guy 3 different times. There is a certain amount of pressure that you have to put on these ropes that trips them into a kind of sleepy state. They say you're supposed to do it for about 20 minutes, but I have found in the past that if you don't do it exactly right, then it doesn't work as good as it should. After the first 2 squeezes, this little guy seemed to be more aware of his surroundings, but still not quite normal. He was needing less and less help from me to find the milk, and he was nursing much more vigorously than he had before. He was still pretty wobbly on his feet, but there were definitely some improvements after the first 2 squeezes. I saw him straining to get some more poop out, and I decided to give him an enema. With him being so compromised, I hesitated to give it to him sooner because I didn't want to create a dangerous electrolyte shift. But now that he was nursing a little bit more, I felt that it would be okay to go ahead and give him one. After doing 2 squeezes and seeing some improvement, I decided to do one more. I squeezed him a little bit harder than I had the previous 2 times, and I noticed immediately that he went into a more sedate state. He was laying down on top of me and I could feel his heart rate get slower and slower. I also was able to feel his body temperature drop, which was pretty worrisome, especially since it was now starting to get really cold and started to snow. Prim was really worried about him, but I decided that I would try my hardest to get him to lay here for the full 20 minutes. After about 10 minutes in the squeeze, both him and I were out like a light. I very slowly unwrapped the lead rope and he did one really big stretch and went back to sleep. Something else that was really interesting was as soon as I took the last wrap of the rope off, I felt his heartbeat surge much higher than it was when he was being squeezed. At this point, I had really high hopes that maybe, just maybe, this squeeze got him back to normal. As the snow started falling and the sun started to come up, it was pretty obvious that Prim, the baby, and I were all exhausted from the night's activities. But eventually the little guy sprung awake and he was completely different. I felt his heart rate increase, his body temperature warm, and then he nickered to Prim, popped up on his feet, and went right for the milk. There were definitely some times throughout the night where I had been questioning a few of my decisions. Should I have called the vet as soon as I thought Prim was in distress? Would it have been better if I just loaded her up and hauled her into the surgical center? Did I adjust the baby's head and neck and feet just right, or was it dumb luck that eventually Prim was able to get him positioned so he could come out? Should I have had oxygen available for him? I do think that I have a unique skill set as well as lots of experience because the level of vet care available close to me is much different than it was back in Montana, and I have a team that doesn't actually know me and my experience. It does make it a little bit more difficult for me to decide when to use a vet and when not to use a vet. Looking back on it now, I'm just really thankful that this little guy finally came around. It's pretty wild, all of the problems he was having from not being pushed through the birth canal normally, and pretty amazing how squeezing him a few times turned his life around so much. The baby didn't get very much time to bond with Prim overnight because he was in quite a state. After I squeezed him the last time and he popped up and got his own milk, I felt good observing them for a while and then going back in the house to get warmed up. After a sleepless night, a cup of coffee was a warm welcome for sure. The forecast called for about an inch of snow, but as time went on, it started to really pile up. I really wanted to stay awake for a little bit longer just to make sure these two were okay. The foal seemed to be recovering well from his ordeal, but Prim did continue to grow uncomfortable. She did have some IV Banamine right after she foaled. I could tell as soon as it wore off because she started to lay down and roll because she was so uncomfortable. It's really important, even if you have a healthy foal, to get the vet out as soon as possible. Luckily, they did have time to come see us today, but it wouldn't be until after lunchtime. Even though I was really worried about Prim, and so was her baby at this point. She didn't have any signs that there was anything really amiss, and she was just experiencing some pain from her traumatic birth. I was really worried that she might have a uterine tear or something catastrophic. Throughout the night, I checked the color of her gums and her temperature a few times. Even a tiny piece of the placenta stuck can cause them to become very quickly within a number of hours. I was blown away when I saw the new little baby jumping around in his stall during the snowstorm. After his rough start, it looks like he is going to be quite the handful for Prim. He did get quite a bit of the colostrum while I was helping him last night, but I do want to make sure that Prim is feeling well enough to nurse him. It looked like she was getting really painful when he was bopping her in the belly with his head. I was also really hoping that it was going to warm up when the sun came up, but it continued to get pretty cold. I dipped the little guy's navel when he was distracted with his milk. I also observed him urinate on the camera earlier and pass some more meconium. So far, he is moving right along, and I'm no longer worried too much about him. I'm pretty sure Prim passed all of her placenta. I looked at it last night and put it aside for the vet to check. But there's always a possibility that there's a tiny piece trapped. I wanted Prim to get some rest, and the baby was getting quite chilled with the weather. Prim trusts me enough to look after her baby, so after he got a nice little breakfast in him, I snuggled him up and we took a little nap together. Even though he does have his blanket on, he was starting to shiver a little bit, and it's pretty serious when these little guys get cold. They can get hypothermic very quickly, and it's hard to undo once their temperature drops. After a really long, hard night, it was nice to share this magical moment with Prim and her new baby, even if I couldn't stay awake for most of it. After having more than a few sleepless nights, as soon as the baby was out and was healthy, I just could not keep my eyeballs open any longer. Once the baby was warmed up, he wanted to get another breakfast. Kinda cool to see this little dude go from blue and presumably not alive to bucking and jumping around in his stall the next morning. As long as Prim has a little bit of pain meds on board, she seems to be fairly comfortable as well. There is a big internal shift that happens when you squeeze out a foal like this. So it's not a surprise that she's feeling a little bit uncomfortable this morning, especially when her rowdy baby bops her in her belly. The camera was really nice to observe her before she foaled, and it was also very nice to sneak a peek at the baby throughout the morning. I did lay down for a few little naps before the vet arrived. It was really fun to see him getting his milk by himself, running and jumping around, and I even caught some more little poops on film. I'm still a little bit worried about Prim and how uncomfortable she is. Oftentimes, horses with uterine tears go undetected until it's far too late. But with the color of her gums, I'm feeling pretty confident that she is just uncomfortable from the really difficult birth.
Good job, Primmy. Let me see you. Let me see
It took
you.
me a couple years to decide to
Thank you.
breed Prim. Last spring, when I was debating it, I knew that Frisco Bill would not be here forever. The last couple of months have been really hard without him. Even if Prim's birth and the foal's arrival was pretty traumatic, I am really happy that I decided to get her bred last year. This little dude is definitely going to make a dent in the giant hole that Frisco's passing left in my heart. Throughout the day, I came in and took little naps with the new foal so Prim could also get some rest. She is turning into a very good mother and does not want the other horses to hurt her new baby. With me protecting him, she can get a little bit of shut-eye. This little dude had a pretty tricky start to his life, but I feel he is right on track now.
Hey, little one. Back to the milk truck.
The vet said this little dude should continue to improve over the next couple of days. Hopefully after that I can start to get to know this little dude a bit better. Thank you guys so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.